wow, that worked. So my phone apparently just starts recording video whenever it sees you do anything outlandish. So I figured, what shall I do? And I just went, and it started recording. So if I appear a little bit surprised, there you are. This is NOTCAST 317. It is the 14th of September 2023. Today I am talking about Kraftwerk's fourth album, although officially it's only now their first album, Autobahn, released in November 1974, which comes in a number of configurations, as well as the singles that were released around about the same time. Autobahn, Comet Melody, a German-only single I don't have, the reissue of Autobahn on 7-inch, and also a couple of essential texts that are really, really important in understanding the Kraftwerk story at that time. I Was a Robot, written by the band's former member Wolfgang Flür. That was published for £14 in the year 2000. And in 2022, the Sound of the Machine, the autobiography of Karl Bartos, one of the other members of the band at the time. And I made the effort to go and see Karl do a book launch at the British Library, and he signed my copy of the book. Now, the surprising other thing is that this was £20, which this is about 630 pages. Let me just quickly check exactly. Oh, no, 633, I think. 34. Whereas this one, published 23 years earlier, is a staggering 285 pages and £14. So if you're going to think about inflation and your basket of goods that you use to counter inflation, if you want to pretend that inflation doesn't exist, put books in there. I probably shouldn't be telling you that, because no doubt some politician will go, books haven't risen in price, even though food has risen by 34% since 2019, for example. It's a false economy, so don't listen to it. They lie. So starting off, I have a confession to make, not a major one, but the very first record from this period is one that I don't have. It was only released in Germany, and it was released in December 1973, and that is the Kraftwerk single, Cahutek, and an early version of Comet Melody on the B-sides. Now, if you want to be really specific about it, you're not missing a huge amount, on the grounds that those are early demo versions of 2 tracks from the Autobahn album that were later released in their own right on Autobahn in different recordings. But if you absolutely positively have to have them, I've just looked them up. Cahutek and Comet Melody is available as a 7-inch single, or was available as a 7-inch single. The cheapest version of it currently on Discogs, £55. So I've never felt the need to buy it, on the grounds that I need for £55 more than I need the records. Of course, if I win the lottery, I am going to buy it, but that is a completely different discussion, and one that well, I'll probably never know happened, actually. If you want to get the early recordings of Cahutek and I think Comet Melody, actually no, just Cahutek, then probably the best bet is to go for a compilation album called, look at that, Supergroup Festival, and that is starts at 65p on Discogs. However, there are no copies for sale in the United Kingdom, otherwise I would own one. So if you want a rare bit of Kraftwerk trivia and obscurity archaeology, probably go for that Supergroup Festival LP, and you can get the non-album version of Cahutek. Now, Cahutek was apparently retitled as Comet Melody 2, re-recorded and included on the Autobahn album. But the interesting thing about Cahutek and Comet Melody is, even though Ralph and Florian are on the cover, I think it is the first Kraftwerk record that was recorded after Wolfgang joined the group in July 1973, which was the month of my birth. Pretty surprising, 50 years ago already. It doesn't feel like 50 years to me. I mean, in my mind, Kraftwerk still feel like a new band, even though they're clearly very, very old indeed. Probably because they still exist in some form. and their music seems to exist outside of chronology and time in the conventional sense. What we will have is also this period for July 1973 was where the Kraftwerk as the four-piece kind of formed. So there was Ralf Hutter, Florian Schneider, Wolfgang Flür on drums and percussion, Klaus Roeder on additional instruments. I don't think he plays on any of the records. And the fifth kind of semi-detached member who didn't appear on the covers was Emil Schult, who did cover art, graphic design, and lyrics, although I think Emil's face was used on one of the covers to try and give the impression of the band being a four-piece after Klaus had left. Anyway, the single of Kohoutek and Comet Melody was only released in Germany. That's why I haven't got it. It didn't sell very many copies. That's another reason why I haven't got it. It's expensive. That's why another reason why I haven't got it. It's hard to get. And had I seen a copy that was affordable at some point in the past 32 years since I became a Kraftwerk fan, sure, I would have bought it, but I haven't. And there's no shortage of things like, gas bills to spend money on in the meantime. So I think with the move to the Autobahn album, which was the Kraftwerk's fourth LP, released in November 1974, Kraftwerk embraced a concept which, and this is where I will show that I clearly cannot speak German, and therefore all you German speakers will laugh at this ridiculous, stupid Englishman saying the word Gesamtkunstwerk, which apparently translates as a complete work of art. The idea that everything about the records and about the band is a work of art in itself. Nothing is not a work of art. So that would be from the cover art, the lyrics, the imagery, the merchandising, even things like the inner sleeve sometimes, or the labels. Everything was designed as a mass-produced work of art that you can then take and see as something of interest for yourself. Now, look at that and you kind of go, well, that's a really strong bit of graphic design. It stands out, it's cheap, it's two colours, lots of contours, lots of lines. It's the first time where it felt, to me at least, that Kraftwerk had got a cohesive concept with which that they were going to be delivering their music. So, for example, Autobahn is an album very definitely of two sides. So side one is the Autobahn title track itself, running at 22 minutes 30 seconds. Side two is Comet Melody 2, Missnacht, and Morgan Spazergang. However that is pronounced, I don't know. I presume, I really hope I've written it down on my notes, that it means something. Morning Walk. There you are, it means morning walk. So you have an album which on both sides the songs have a thematic whole around travel, one using the roads and the other using space itself. So the Comet Melody, the Midnight, and the Morning Walk. So the journey through night to the morning. So starting off the record, and you will see on the sleeve here the members, and this is a 1974 stereo edition, I think, on Vertigo in the UK. I think this might be my dad's copy, but I don't think he cares too much about that. This has Ralf Florian, Klaus Roeder on violin and guitar, and Wolfgang Flür on percussion. So Wolfgang replacing the kind of limited drum machines that only had a very limited set of patterns that you could play. I think this is the first album where I think the hierarchy of the band became more obvious. So Tone Float, Kraftwerk 1 and 2, and Ralf and Florian were albums where Kraftwerk were kind of reducing themselves to their core elements and kind of stripping away the bits that weren't really Kraftwerk, in much the same way sometimes a band needs somebody to leave before they become the band that they are. Suede needed Justine Frischmann to leave the band before they became Suede, for example. And Kraftwerk needed the other people to leave before they became Kraftwerk, really. Underworld is exactly the same thing. The dialogue between Rick Smith and Carl Hyde is the thing that constitutes Underworld. And when there was a 5-piece version of the band, it was almost as if there were too many elements in there. Like when you have the most amazing meal and then somebody puts the wrong sauces on top of it, I guess is probably where we're going to say with that. What we did have is actually also a clear demarcation in the hierarchy of the group, which, having read both The Sounds of the Machine and I Was a Robot, has made me feel less than 100% comfortable about how the band, or more correctly, how Ralf and Florian treated Wolfgang and Carl. Is Ralf and Florian came from prosperous backgrounds. They had access to money and culture and education. In a post-war environment, they had effectively a cultural clean slate from which they could then create their own version of their work and their identity. Florence's father was an architect who designed, amongst many other things, Cologne Airport, and was very successful at it, and probably quite prosperous as a result. And it ushered in an era of this time of a thing called the New Objectivity. You can tell I've been reading some books about it because I don't remember 1973 at all. I was too busy playing a sandpit. And the New Objectivity was something which I think happened in architecture. It was about having very clean, functional, unfussy lines, straight edges, clean surfaces. And that also kind of tied in with the aesthetic of the band. As you can see, the cover of Autobahn ties in with this new objectivity. The idea that it's functional, it's clean, it's very flat. There's a minimal colour palette that you've got in there, and those are appropriate. And you know, this symbol of blue with the motorway on it, very similar to the motorway signs that you get in the UK. Kraftwerk 1 and 2 had green and orange traffic cones on the front, for example. So the band were already leaning into that sort of imagery. But here you can really see this clean, functional aesthetic that becomes part of their complete work of art. You know, if you wanted to represent what does Autobahn sound like from looking at it, and you go, well, that's pretty accurate actually. You can say almost the use of electronics and the use of percussion and synthesizers and their own self-created sound machines. You could kind of say, well, firstly, the sounds are there to exist outside of the conventional instrumentation. You know, no bass, no drums, no guitar, although there is a bit of guitar according to Close on the sleeve. It doesn't really sound like guitar ever. You kind of get this approach where it doesn't feel necessarily that it belongs to the same universe as any other contemporary act. And you also had I think Florian and Ralph, I think, were studying architecture as well. Now, on a side note, what is it about architects and bands? Pink Floyd was made out of architects. Kraftwerk was made out of architects. Is there some kind of discipline about rigor and control and lines and functionalism that feeds into the sound of the band? Basically, are successful musicians frustrated architects? Who knows? I certainly don't. Maybe I'm a frustrated architect. That's why I'm drawn to these bands. I don't think I am, although I did work in property for 16 years. And over time, whether I liked it or not, I then learned the ability to really appreciate architecture, to really appreciate the beauty of curved lines, straight edges, around how space is manipulated and controlled, and to the point where you can kind of see some of the brutalist architecture is almost designed to kind of flatten original thinking. So someone like Gaudi, for example, who's very human in his designs, manipulates space to inspire you in the imaginative point of view. A grey and dull tower block that's made out of straight lines, flat edges, just greys. It becomes a kind of like functional version of a building. Like, for example, if you eat food and you're only eating food for the ability to keep yourself alive. If you want to think about some really weird and dark stuff, by the way, there's a thing called a Nutriloaf, which is basically prison food in America. It's got enough of the constituents that make sure that you have all the the necessary calories and vitamins, etc., to not get ill. But at the same point, it's specifically designed to be so dull, so boring, so unappetizing to eat that it's sometimes called the punishment loaf. And it's also designed to be effectively kind of not aggressively unpleasant, but just very bland and dull in terms of its flavour, its taste, even its consistency when you chew it. So, for example, I'm going to sound a bit like the guy from The Matrix now. You put a burger in your mouth, let's say you're not a vegetarian or a vegan, and you have this sense of texture and flavour and moistness that's enjoyable. With a Nutriloaf, it's specifically designed to be as boring and as dull and as bland and as cold play as humanly possible. And there have been court cases around the Nutriloaf where people have kind of sued the American prison system for saying it's effectively punishment food. I think the neutral oath has been withdrawn. I couldn't guarantee it because I haven't looked it up on Wikipedia. 5 minutes ago, I had no idea I was going to be talking about it. That's how these things work, is that all these ideas just kind of float into my head like a stream of consciousness once I start talking. And then all of a sudden, I'm at the 54 minutes mark. I've run out of time and I've run out of energy and I need an oxygen mask because I speak very quickly. And I'm sat there like Iggy Pop backstage at a gig just going... And it's like, it's only me talking about Kraftwerk, mate. Just calm your boots. But there you are. So with the way in which the band works, and I've said this before, tying in with functionalism and objectivity and architecture, is that Ralph and Florian, because they'd been in the band right from day one, they didn't necessarily have to work. It wasn't that they were poor, but they certainly weren't rich. Is that because they had been the members who instigated the band, I think they saw themselves as perhaps, I think, more integral to the success of the Kraftwerk vision than Wolfgang and Klaus and Karl. They might have seen them as lesser and as employees because Wolfgang joined in 1973, just before the band became successful. Karl joined just after the band became successful in, I think, late 1974. So in their minds, they were people that hadn't spent the time in the trenches, in the penury and the poverty, grinding their way through to some form of success. They hadn't done the work, which I think is really unfair. I think it also really discounts the creative abilities of both Karl and Wolfgang, and it created an uneven power structure in the band that ultimately was to cause it to unravel in a decade or so's time. Wolfgang and Karl were middle class, and that's detailed quite clearly in the books. There's financial inequity in the band that becomes obvious very quickly when the band became successful. Ralph and Florian effectively saw themselves not only as the kind of like the leaders of the band, but also the main financial business people in the band that made the decisions. So, for example, Florian bought a Mercedes, which was not cheap at all following the success of the album, and Wolfgang and Karl didn't have enough money to buy a Mercedes. And you can argue that, yeah, there's a degree of inequality in that, which, as we've seen from the disgraceful story of Martin Duffy, and the way that other people get relegated through to session musicians when really they don't deserve it, is, well, it's kind of like, you know, socialism on the stage and capitalism on the balance sheets, isn't it? It's not really fair. So with Ralph and Florian as the core kind of members of the band, on the 19th of July 1973, Wolfgang, who was completing a practical course in architecture and store design, had been in a band called Spirit of Sound with Michael Rover. Michael Rover joined Kraftwerk as a guitarist. Florian obviously playing the flute, and used the flute as almost like the wordless lead melody role, effectively the vocal, on the Kraftwerk 1 and 2 and Ralph and Florian albums. And they kind of took the approach, as seen on the back of the Ralph and Florian album, or the front, depending on which version you've got, is almost what looks like a laboratory setup. They're experimenting in sound. They're scientists, and even now, Ralph, when he gives an interview, will talk about them, you know, testing hypotheses, and when something is true, they then record it to tape. The idea of being experimenting in sound, sonic architects and laboratory technicians with sound as their canvas, creating sounds that feel new and innovative. So they were constructing their own sonic identity, and Kraftwerk is certainly as much about sound and texture as it is about melody. And Wolfgang, when he joined the band, was able to take the band beyond, effectively, I think it's called a Robo-Vox, but it could be wrong, the very limited basic drum machines of 1973, and to play those rhythms in a very rigid fashion, but also at the same point to give them a degree of human flair and texture that lifted them above and beyond. So the instruments which Ralph was playing was a Farcifer, a Hammond B3 and a Mini Moog, by the way. Florian was on an ARP and a flute, and he had something else, I can't remember what it was. But the cost of something like a Mini Moog, by the way, was about the same as buying a new Volkswagen. So the idea of Autobahn being a metaphor for travel is you could buy a car or you could buy a synthesizer. Which one are you going to do? And then you end up kind of, well, if you buy the synthesizer, then you have to go on a journey through sound. And that's where the concept of Autobahn, I think, really came into play. So there are 2 covers for Autobahn, much like the Ralph and Florian album. In the UK, it's this blue and white traffic design that then became the standardized international version of it. If you were in Germany, apparently, because I don't have a German version of the original Autobahn LP, it was this here. It was this photo, not a photo, it was a painting. I think, again, the painting was by Emil Schultz, and you kind of, there's the inner sleeve of the late 80s CD, but that is the painting, and the painting is effectively kind of like a glamorized tourist board version of the Autobahn, the German motorway. And I remember first time I went to Germany, we drove on a motorway, and what I was very, very keen on is I was going, how much like the Autobahn cover does the German motorway look? And the answer is quite a lot. But also the cliche is, if you've seen one motorway, you've seen them all. However, as anybody knows from T-based services, that is not the case. Of course, I mentioned T-based services, but that's not strictly true, because I think possibly the most famous modern motorway service in the land is actually this fantastic building called the Pennine Tower. And if you think all motorway services are the same, you've never seen this one. Honestly, every time I see it, I'm really quite impressed by how beautiful it is. It looks like something of a James Bond film. Apparently, it's quite tall indeed. And whilst I work it, that's also, by the way, at Lancaster Forton Services, which is about 11 kilometres away from Lancaster, between junctions 32 and 33 of the M6 motorway. I am in a Facebook group called Bridge of the Day. Every time anybody drives past, they take a picture of it and then they post it up, because it is pretty damn iconic. In fact, as far as I would go to say, it's possibly the only motorway services that looks like it should be in a James Bond film, possibly where the top flips open and a rocket comes out. Who knows? So I kind of veered off piste a little bit there, but have to remember the UK cover of Autobahn, this one here, which has now become the standardized international cover of the album. This is based upon the UK motorway sign that you'll see if you're driving around on UK motorways. It's a symbol of this, and then it will tell you which junction you're at and how many miles it is, to Newport Pagnell, where if you're a Smiths fan, you're going to lose your bag. Those type of things are really kind of important. But that is the cover of Autobahn in the UK. And I think the album was recorded partially at Kling Klang Studios in Dusseldorf, but mostly at Connie Plank's studio. And it was kind of like thinking about how the album is constructed and how the song is constructed. I think probably the best way to describe it is industrial folk music. So it's kind of like if a town could make a song, it would sound like Autobahn. And I watched Star Trek The Motion Picture the other day, and if a town would make a song, it would then think of humans as carbon units infesting it. And actually the city doesn't need humans. The idea of exploring the relationship between man and the world, between man and machine, between nature and technology. These are all things and themes which turn up all the way through Kraftwerk's Future Activity like a stick of rock, that are kind of implanted inside the Autobahn album itself. And the title track, although it is, as I said, 22 minutes and 30 seconds long, and for this, I'm going to draw out the blue vinyl release from 2020 because it's more interesting than looking at the same 1974 LP cover. The title track of Autobahn is, well, let's put it bluntly, it's where it all began, isn't it? When people think of Kraftwerk, they think of the fun of the Autobahn, which is kind of like the Beach Boys song about the fun in the sun. And if you think that that's not intentional, I think that's quite naive. Really is probably the best way to think about it. It's a 22.5-minute song, and it, like a lot of sidelong epics, it kind of gets a bit proggy. So the nearest comparison to Autobahn is probably something like Pink Floyd's not Atom Heart Mother, Pink Floyd's Echoes. Autobahn is effectively Echoes for Kraftwerk. It's a sidelong exploration of a journey. It's got a trance-like state, almost like a flow or a hypnosis, where the rhythms and the parts become not repetitive but monotonous, to the point where slight variations inside the patterns are the things that really leap out to you. Like if you're looking out of the window of a desert in a car and what you see is just sand, 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 sand. Any slight thing that breaks up that monotony then has far more importance to it, to anything else, which also ties in with things like was it the Andy Warhol film that called Erection, which is about 9 hours long, which is about how they time-lapse photography of making a tower or somebody watching somebody sleep. It's a 22-minute epic. It's playful, it's childlike, it's kind of like a nursery rhyme, and it uses the texture of sound to feel a little bit like it's a child that's playing it. This sense of wonder as I'm driving on the motorway. That's amazing. I mean, a car, that's amazing. You know, there's this sense of the fun of the Autobahn. And it uses things like horns, car horns, beeps of cars as they go past, the roar of air as a vehicle goes past you, air pressure, the sound of suspension, wheels upon the patterns of the surface. And so, for example, if you're driving on a motorway and it's got what's called the old-fashioned cat's eyes, and that is the reflective surfaces that are built into there, so that when your car headlights kind of go onto the motorway, it kind of pushes back, but as they go over those, they make a little boom boom noise, because obviously it's not flat, it's poking out slightly from the surface of it. It's all around building this symphony of sound that comes from the sounds that come from just existing in the world, driving a vehicle. And if you want to get really into it, and I think this is where Kraftwerk went with it, is that when you're just listening, a lot of time when you're driving, you're not thinking about what you're actually hearing or thinking about driving. Is, well, I'm going from there to there, and a car is an A to B machine, and you've probably got some music on, you might be singing along, you might be talking. What you're not doing is you're not listening to the sound of the world around you, in the way that when you try to go to sleep at night, for example, when I try to go to sleep at night, it doesn't always work, because my brain's going, oh, it's quiet now, listen to that. There's a ringing in your ears. That's tinnitus. Do you remember the gig you got that from? Like, yeah, it's a really good gig. Was it worth it? No, absolutely not. Thanks, brain. Shut up. I'm trying to get to sleep now. Brain goes, oh no, here's another thing. Listen to that. That's your heartbeat. Listen to that. You can hear your heart going. You can feel the blood going through. Listen to that. You can hear, if you listen really closely, you can hear the blood going through your ears. Wow, isn't that freaky? And then you kind of also become to the point you become very, very sensitized to your own body, and kind of go, I can feel the hairs in my nose moving. I can hear how deafening the sound of my own heart is, especially if you're in one of those kind of like soundproof chamber things. It drives you mad, apparently, if you've been in for a few minutes. You just can't, because you suddenly become aware of just how loud everything is, that most of the time it's just buried under the noise and under the din of everyday life. And Autobahn, as a song, is a song that kind of takes, or wants to turn into a symphony, the mundane, the normal, the banal, the commute that comes from driving to and from work. And the 22-minute track is structured, by the way, to reflect the journey from Dusseldorf to Hamburg. So it starts off in the Ruhr Valley, the sound of the machines. It moves through the farms, and it moves through the agriculture, and you kind of get a sense of organic sounds, the sound of wind rushing past you, the sound of cars going like as you go through places like Postrop and places like that. And then as you get to Munster, you can get to hear the flute as it kind of moves into the track and becomes part of the melody. And then the whole thing kind of stops when you get to your destination. Now, having never been to Hamburg or Dusseldorf for that matter, I suspect it takes longer than 22 minutes to drive between the two. I could be wrong. Maybe if you've got the fastest car in the world, it takes 15 minutes on a clear day. Who knows? But it's a song that's very cleverly and carefully designed, and ties in with that concept of the complete work of art. So, side 2 of the album, and this is where we bring over the photograph there, which I think is obviously Ralph Florian. That might be Emil, actually. No, actually, that could be Wolfgang, actually, with a beard and long hair. I don't know. I don't know, to be honest. I can pretend I know, but I don't. Then you've got the four faces there of the band. That might be Wolfgang for all I know, actually. What you've got there is this image of these four people in the back seat of the car going on a journey, and it's no real surprise, is it? Is that and that is exactly the same kind of stylized graphic design of what's happening. So over to side 2 of the record, and we have I shouldn't have taken this out. So side 2, Comet Melody number 1. There's my greasy finger marks on it. Comet Melody number 2, Mitternacht being Midnight, and then Morgan's Spazergang, i.e. Morning Walk. And that's a journey that goes from night through to day. So the Comet Melody being looking up in the stars, looking at the comet Kohoutek, which was due to buzz the world in 1973, by the way, and may come back yet again as it flies through the cosmos. It becomes Comet Melody number 1, and Kohoutek becomes Comet Melody number 2, retitled for the album and presented in a remixed, re-recorded version with a different set of percussion tracks on there as well. So it's an interesting record. These themes are quite curious, actually, the way that they approach the situation. On the 2009 remaster, by the way, we have the restored artwork. So there is the imagery. This imagery is, by the way, also used by the band when they played live, up to a certain point at least. Hyper stylized, almost tourism style images of the beautiful motherland. And by the way, if you've ever been to Germany, you'll know that their electricity pylons look different to the ones in the UK. Whenever I get to go to France or to Belgium or somewhere like that, especially the Eurostar, I keep an eye out for the differences. And then we have the motorway, the Volkswagen there, which is not completely coincidental. There's even a little section on the title track to Autobahn where it breaks in and you kind of get a version of Autobahn as played on an AM radio, which on the video you have a hand kind of turning that, tuning it in to the radio station, beaming out a message across the nation. And then is your Autobahn title track. Now, Autobahn, released in November 1974. In December 1974, Karl Bartos joined the band and played his first show, I think, on the 22nd of January 1975 in, I think it might have been Cologne or somewhere like that, which I think was broadcast on the radio. The band went into tour in America in March 1975, and that was on the back of a successful single. So the first hit, although hit is possibly not the word to use for it, the first hit is Autobahn. Here is an original 1974 phonogram UK version that contains a 3.5-minute edit of the title track of Autobahn itself, and on the back is the Comet Melody number 1. So you can kind of say, well, technically you've got Kohoutek on a 7-inch single, but it is the LP mix. Kraftwerk have never been a band that have been particularly into providing B-sides or anything like that. They're certainly not Prince, so the idea of a non-album track on the B-side is unheard of. This, by the way, thanks to my brother, is the 7-inch sleeve that he had for Every Rose Has Its Thorn by the absolutely risible dogshit glam metal band Poison. Yes, and I will take the piss out of them because they're fucking terrible. They make Motley Crue look like Shaft. And I have words about Motley Crue coming up in a future episode. Autobahn there, the 7-inch single, which I don't think was really expected to do great business, but somehow was picked up, went onto the radio and became a hit. And from there, Kraftwerk never looked back. They kind of thought, well, this is the thing. We've managed to find our niche in the world, which is thematic, electronic, slightly quirky songs about weird and unusual things to do with living in the modern world. Always explored the nature between, or more correctly, the relationship between man, nature and technology, which later became the main motif on the Expo 2000 single that came out in the year 2000. But it was a big hit, and it Autobahn also kind of then resulted in a number of compilation LPs as record labels tried desperately to recoup the little costs which they'd made, the band started touring in America, and whilst they were touring in America, they released this single. This is a Dutch copy of Comet Melody No. 2, backed with Mitternacht, also called as Midnight. This version belongs to Radio Netherlands in wherever that is. Wellem Dormroep. I don't know what that is. My Dutch is appalling, so I can't really talk about it in any great detail. Though I know a few words. Stroopwafel, fantastic words. And that's Comet Melody No. 2. And then on the B side, of course, Midnight. So there you have it. Autobahn did really, really well in the US, by the way. And the band started touring. They had a problem with voltage differences on the tour. So, for example, they were running on 220 volts or 50 hertz, which was the German frequency for electricity. By the time we got to France, it was 110 volts and 60 hertz. So what you had to do was you had to fire up the equipment, leave it switched on, and then kind of tune it every day to make sure it would work. There were voltage differences between the countries. Electrics from the lights affected the equipment because of the load that they were drawing upon the power sockets that were coming through it. What they found is that sometimes, especially when they were rehearsing, is that the voltages and the power of what they were producing would drop out when the factory switched on, or not, as the case might be. They were quite successful in the US. They sold 450,000 units. And that, when they were touring in the US, that was where two things of critical importance started to happen to the band. The first one was that the phrase "the man machine," Die Mensch Machine, was placed upon the tour's posters that were advertising the tour. Kraftwerk, the Man Machine, 1975 US tour. It defined the band for the rest of their careers, the concept of men and machines operating together in perfect harmony. Also, there was a clear segregation in the band. Ralph and Florian became effectively the business leaders. So while Wolfgang and Carl were touring, they weren't involved in business decisions, they weren't involved in finance decisions. They were brought on as session musicians, they were paid salaries, and it then started to have a clear effect of segregation within the members of the group. It was, in my opinion, I think the thing where things started to go a little differently. Every band has its leaders. Every band has people that have particular roles within the group. Some are better, some are worse. Some people become leaders, some people don't. But ultimately, if you have everybody in the group that's treated roughly equally, and to each according to their abilities and to each according to their needs, what you end up is a band that multiplies on the basis of its members' talents and not merely adds or subtracts its members' talents. With that little lesson in communism to one side, there was an unofficial release from the tour, hot on the heels of Autobahn. Came in the release of 1998's Concert Classics albums, which is a pretty strange record. It's also available here on CD. This release, I think, is now blocked on Discogs, and it I think was the Kraftwerk recorded in Dallas in 1975, might have been Detroit, performing 4 songs, being effectively on this. It's Autobahn, Comet Melody, Kling Klang, and a version of dance music. This one has Comet Melody first, then Autobahn, then Kling Klang, then a fade of dance music, which is a little strange. Also features cover art there from a different period. It was the first of a number of, I think, unofficial copyright testing releases, where old radio broadcasts were repurposed and turned into unofficial one-run releases. It wasn't particularly, I think, it wasn't particularly popular, I think it's fair to say, and a band as perhaps litigious as Kraftwerk might have been managed to clamp down on it pretty quickly. But as is often the case with these grey market releases, it's pressed once and then it disappears. You never see it again. The hit is made, and the crime, so to speak, is not repeated, so you can't catch them a second time. It's like a bank job. If you go back to the same bank multiple times, don't ask me how I know this. If you go back to a bank multiple times, they're probably going to work out who you are. If you only do it once, they're like, who the hell's this guy? We've never seen him before. And there you are. But no, Concert Classics, released in 1998, is a completely adequate but unofficial live album recorded on the American tour in 1975. And if you can find a copy, it's worth getting. Don't pay top notch for it, even though it is a soundboard recording. There's also soundboard recordings of a number of other shows on the tour, including Vancouver, I think Croydon, and I think maybe Dallas or Detroit or somewhere like that as well. Really interesting to have, especially because at that point, Kraftwerk as a live proposition were very, very different to what they are now. Kraftwerk now are a very rigid live experience. Kraftwerk then, they were effectively taking the templates from the original material and recreating it on stage. And of course, because of the human nature of it, it was different every time. The Autobahn title tracks sometimes went up to about 45-50 minutes in length. The band also played on stage new songs which they'd written whilst on tour, songs like Europe Endless, for example. The improvisations at the end of Autobahn turned into live versions of Showroom Dummies, and live versions of songs kind of explored the possibilities of what songs could be. And so if you want to hear, for example, the classic four-piece lineup of Ralph, Florian, Carl and Wolfgang playing songs like Europe Endless or Showroom Dummies, which they didn't play live after release, you have to go for the live improvisations. And I'll post the links to circulating versions of those performances at the bottom of the screen. That, of course, was not the end for the Autobahn album. There was a compilation album that was released in October 1975. Hot on the heels of Autobahn, we had Accelerate, which features material from Kraftwerk 1 and 2, Ralph and Florian, and Autobahn, which I've mentioned on here, with an edit of Autobahn that's on there, as well as a couple of other songs, including Comet Melody number 2. That was also later reconfigured for Electrokinetic, which was released in 1981, which has Comet Melody number 2. Again, not the single version, drat, but you can't win them all. In 2004, leaping massively ahead, the band prepared the release of the catalogue, the digital remasters of their albums, which got a promo release. Here is the 2004 limited edition promo release box set of the 8 albums on CD. This was not commercially released. These remasters were not used. So if you want to get the 2004 remasters, the only place to get it is to get the 8 CD 2004 promo only catalogue box set. And this features the 8 studio albums: Autobahn, Radioactivity, Trans-Europe Express, The Man Machine, Computer World, Electro, well, called Techno Pop, but really it's Electric Cafe, The Mix, and Tour de France there on remasters. These remasters were never commercially issued because a second set of remasters was issued in 2009, featuring both the European and German versions of the catalogue. And in the year 2020, we got the coloured vinyl versions of the album. So I bought the German coloured vinyl versions of the 2009 remasters. And this was in 2020, where we had the lovely blue version of Autobahn, which I showed you earlier on. In 2018, mind you, there was an extra release, a one-off release, only in Germany, cover mounted to the front of Music Express magazine. And Music Express magazine, April 2018, featured a short one-page interview with Ralph and a photo of the robot, the Ralph bot, and also featured for the first time the and so far the only commercial release that I've been able to find of the single edit of Autobahn remastered in 2009 on a one-sided 7-inch blue vinyl disc. There, the other side just has nothing on it. So no chance for Kahootek or Comet Melody to be on there. Darn. But Autobahn got a blue vinyl 7-inch release, April 2018 in Music Express magazine. If you absolutely desperately have to have this, I believe that Music Express do have some copies left for €9.99. I am not getting a commission from them. And finally, in 2017, the world saw the release of the Kraftwerk's 3D the catalogue. This was effectively Kraftwerk remixing and re-recording all their 8 core Canon albums using their then lineup of Ralph, Fritz Hilpert, Henning Schmitz, Falk Griffengen, and presenting them in either an 8 CD box set version or, oh god, this one, I think I need, or an 8 LP version. Effectively, this is where the Kraftwerk story so far has ended, is the 3D catalogue. It is absolutely necessary that I mention that we have released in 2017 a re-recorded, remixed, reimagined, represented version of the Autobahn album. All of the songs played live, although with huge amounts of studio magic added to it, featuring Autobahn in a 14-minute version, Come At Melody 1 and 2, Mitternacht, and Morgan Spazergang, however that's pronounced. Surely the German amongst you will be cringing at my terrible British vowels. Of course, being British, we only speak English because we're pathetic, and we really need to stop being so arrogant. Either that, or everyone should speak the same language, and then I think there'll be a lot less wars. The 2017 version of the catalogue features, as I've said, reimagined, re-recorded, remixed, rearranged versions of the entire body of work, created very faithfully and very sympathetically by the band's current lineup, and has become the basis of their current touring process, which is to, of course, not release any new material, only play old stuff, and to not release anything. The vinyl version of the catalogue, by the way, comes with this, which also features a download code which expired, Jesus, 5 years ago. It doesn't seem like that long ago, but it is. That's Kraftwerk's Autobahn, and I'm not going to lie to you, I bloody love Kraftwerk. I also love bands that make music after 1977, by the way, in case you ever wondered. But Kraftwerk are one of my favourites. And when I get to the relevant period in history, I'll talk about my conversion to Kraftwerk, which was both immediate and very unusual when I get to that. But in the meantime, that is me talking about Kraftwerk's 4th studio record, released in 1974. A staggering 49 years ago. It seems like, much less than that, to be honest. Autobahn is a classic album. It changed the face of music. From this point onwards, Kraftwerk started to become kind of identified as basically the techno Beatles. You think about the difference between some of their then peers, artists like Jean-Michel Jarre, Tangerine Dream, for example, that both improvised heavily on stage, but also hadn't yet mastered the art of live performance. Kraftwerk, when Autobahn came out, seemed to arrive almost fully formed. The concepts were in place, the imagery was in place, the ideas were in place, everything was kind of formed. So if you think about Autobahn, is basically the equivalent of the Goldfinger of the band's discography. This is the template upon which everything else has inevitably been either a repetition or an evolution. It is the ground zero, so to speak, or patient zero of Kraftwerk's discography, and it's fair to say it changed the face of music in ways in which to this day we do not yet fully comprehend. But in everything that you hear, there is a little bit of Kraftwerk, in the same way that in almost everything you hear, there's a little bit of the Beatles. Almost everything, of course. And with that, I'm going to wrap up. Next time we talk about Kraftwerk, I'm going to be talking about Radioactivity. But in the meantime, if any of you feel like posting me a copy of the German Cahootek 7-inch single and me not paying you, sure, great, go ahead. If that doesn't happen, and that's okay if it doesn't happen, I'm going to keep my eyes and ears open for a copy of Supergroup Festival LP in the UK. And then when one eventually turns up, I might buy it. But if it doesn't, I won't. So, stay beautiful. If you've liked and enjoyed this episode, brilliant, so have I. Please subscribe. The more subscribers I get, the more chance I have of ever getting any money out of YouTube. I need at least 1,000 subscribers to do that. I'm not quite at 1,000 yet. And then if you've got any suggestions about what you might want to hear me talking about apart from old records, please do let me know. In case you hadn't worked out, when I talk about a band I love, I start at their first album and I go all the way through to the end. No Star Wars economics for me where it goes 4, 5, 6, then 1, 2, 3. No. I start at the beginning. I go all the way to the end. And what that means is, whilst you think, Mark's talking about lots of old bands, if they're still going, I am going to talk about the new stuff. Just might take me a little while to get there. One of the other things also is about female artists. Although I haven't mentioned any on here, I'm a huge fan of a number of those. I just haven't felt the compulsion to talk about them in front of my phone for 50 minutes at a time. So maybe count yourselves lucky. I've got enough bloody bands on the go as it is. So I'm going to head off, and I have no idea what the time is or anything. I'm going to go, and if you've made it to the end, brilliant, congratulations. Hopefully I've made your washing up, stroke ironing, stroke whatever it is that you're doing less boring. If I've made it more boring, I'm really sorry. I can't help it. Sometimes I am boring, I know it, and that's why I do this as opposed to talk to my cats who look at me like, Christ, you're boring. Can't you get a YouTube channel? Quite how a cat can say that in just the tone of its eyes, I don't know, but my cats do it. Anyway, smell you later, and thanks for making it to the end. Bye.